This is Brad of Yargmetal, and I'm talking with Dr. Joe Jorgensen, the Libertarian U.S. presidential candidate. Dr. Jorgensen, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Thank you again for chatting with us. We do have listeners all over the world, but a lot of our listeners are in the United States. But of course, people all over the world do look to the United States, and they're very interested in what's going on here. Um,
Yes.
so, first of all, I imagine that a lot of people, unfortunately, don't really understand what a libertarian is. Could you maybe give me a thumbnail sketch of what a libertarian is and what the Libertarian Party is all about?
Yep. I tell people the Libertarian Party is on your side and not the side of special interests, lobbyists, and bureaucrats in Washington. And I tell voters that you know best what your family needs and you know better how to spend your money than any politician in Washington.
Okay, so my personal opinion, we're a two-party country right now, really,
Yep.
and I don't feel like either of those parties are offering the people anything.
Nope.
So, so how do you see a third party being able to get into this? And being a serious candidate.
Well, you're right. It's really difficult to break through because they're the ones in power. And they realize that, for instance, if I were on the debate stage, that I would be the only real alternative that voters would hear. So they're doing everything they can to keep me from being heard because they know Americans will love what they hear when they hear our message.
Well, great. Well, let's. I do have some specific questions that some of our
Sure.
listeners have asked about. Number one on my list is about the right to protest, and I know you support that First Amendment and the right to protest. What do you think about the way the protests have been going in this country recently?
Well, absolutely. We have the First Amendment right to protest, and we have the right to have our voices heard, to peacefully protest. Unfortunately, originally the protests were being hijacked by some opportunists. And there were many people, and there are many recordings out there. People can go listen to them, where the protesters were getting mad at the people who were basically coming in and vandalizing, saying, hey, you're not helping our cause. Hey, we didn't ask you to come here. We're trying to just get a message out there. However, yes, there have been some that have turned towards sheer vandalism. And of course, those people need to be held to the fullest extent of the law. But our tradition in our country is that we do have a free choice and we do have the right to express our opinion.
All right, thank you very much. Let's say we could get you elected. Okay. Obviously, the House and the Senate are mostly Republicans and Democrats. How would you be able to work with them, and how would you be able to get things done in that environment?
Well, my short answer is I'm a teacher and I know how to handle problem students. But my longer answer is, first of all, I have promised that my very first official act would be to bring the troops home. And I can do that without Congress because as commander in chief, I can make that decision without them. Now, of course, when it comes to getting rid of the Department of Education and many of these other things that are hurting Americans more than it's helping them, I would need Congress. So what I would do is, first of all, not simply accept any budget that came my way, the same way Ronald Reagan did. A lot of people said, well, we got smaller government under Ronald Reagan. Couldn't we, wouldn't it be great to go back to times like the 80s? But they don't realize that actually government grew every year for 8 straight years. So unlike Reagan, who signed anything they put in front of him, I would push back and I would say, no, I refuse to sign a budget unless it's balanced and unless it's less than the previous year. And they could come up with 20 different budgets. I would say no 20 different times until it was something that was acceptable. So, to put in teaching terms again, I know how to grade an F paper and send it back. Now, could they override me? Absolutely, they could. But first of all, they'd have to work really hard to do that. And secondly, I would remind them that their constituents voted me in as president. And if they wanted to be reelected to their nice cush jobs, then they need to follow my lead.
Okay, thank you. A lot of what's going on with the House and the Senate, there's certain things that they've voted on that some of us consider entitlements that they receive, and they've passed laws. How would you, or would you try to do something about that? Would you try to, reform them?
Reform Congress from spending money on themselves?
Yeah.
Yeah, good luck with that. First of all, one thing that I've pointed out is back in the 90s when I ran for VP, I was the VP nominee in 1996, and then I ran for U.S. House in 92. One of the big things that was going on was that it came to light that there was a congressional barbershop and that taxpayers were actually paying for the haircuts of people in Congress, even though they were making at the time, 6 times what the average American made. Well, I long for those days because look at where we are now. Now we've got congressional representatives who are going out and getting their hair cut while keeping us under lockdown and preventing us from getting our hair cut. So it's rather tragic that before it was simply us paying for their haircuts and now we don't even get our own haircuts. But seriously, as long as there's money and power in Congress, in government, it's going to be hard to keep those guys out, which is why even though I come down on the side of term limits, I don't think it's going to be that big of a help. And I think that's more of a symptom of the problem and not the actual problem. We need to cut the size of government so that there's not the power and money for people to go after.
So, one of our listeners is concerned about the government spying on its citizens in the Patriot Act. Do you see that as being something that you can have some kind of effect on, or how do you even feel about that?
Oh, sure, I can get rid of the Patriot Act. Seriously, that act has done more against Americans than against our enemies, and we absolutely have to get rid of it.
Okay. All right. And then you mentioned getting haircuts, which, by the way, I haven't had one since March. If you could see
Yes.
me. Yeah, it's a delight. How, I don't know of anybody that's happy with the way things are going with the pandemic right now. Do you have any ideas of ways that you can turn this around?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me mention Donald Trump's biggest problem, biggest mistake is that he didn't get rid of the FDA obstacles so that we could all be tested early on. South Korea diagnosed their first case within the same week that we had our first case. And they quickly jumped ahead in testing and they contained the spread. And by the way, they did that without shutting down the economy. Meanwhile, we don't get tested thanks to the FDA and the CDC. And so we're all under house arrest in which we're not allowed to go to our jobs. And then we lose tens of millions of jobs. That is not the way to handle it. I'd like to point out that there were basically dozens of tests out there around the world in which people could have used to test to see if they had coronavirus. And yet, thanks to the government, the FDA and the CDC, we were only allowed to use 2 of them originally. And there are still restrictions on testing. And in addition, Trump stood there on stage with Dr. Fauci and said, if you don't have symptoms, you don't need to get tested. Even though they knew at the time that over half the people with the virus didn't have any symptoms at all. That's the time you should get tested, is when you could be spreading it without knowing it. So that's the testing and basically locking us all up answer. The other answer to the money, it's clear from the research that money left in the hands of private citizens and businesses create twice as many jobs as that same money that goes to the government. And I would much rather have General Motors, Apple, many of these other companies, I'd rather them keep the money to create jobs than to turn that money over to Donald Trump, Nancy Pelosi, and Joe Biden and ask them to hire people.
All right. Thank you. So,
and can I point out
yes.
one other thing too? This just shows how people in power get that power by getting money from corporations in which they turn around and then give them even more power. So notice under the lockdown, large corporations and some of these big box chain stores, they were allowed to stay open. And meanwhile, mom and pop stores were shut down. And then they come up with the CARES package, the Stimulus Act. And a lot of people were excited about their $1,200 check, but they don't realize how much money was going to these big corporations who, by the way, didn't have to shut down during the pandemic. Personally, I would rather we have kept the money, and I would have spent money at my local mom and pop store that was forced to shut down instead of giving it to the big corporations. If they want our business, let them work for it. Let them show us that they can give us the best quality and the best price. I don't want corporations to work for Congress and get favors from them. I want them to work for us and work for our business.
Well, I can see why they don't want you in the debate. You make way too much sense. So well
Yep.
done. Okay, I know that. Let's talk about immigration because that's another hot button for the citizens of the U.S. What's your stand on that?
So yes, you're right. It is a hot button issue. And I can tell you that I want to have the immigration program that we had before the 1920s when my grandparents came over here. 3 of my 4 grandparents are immigrants to this country, and they came over before we shut down immigration in the 1920s. And I don't want immigration to help other people coming in. I want immigration because that's what makes America strong. That's what made our country strong. GDP goes up when we have immigrants. And unlike people who are using scare tactics for crime, if you look at the stats, you'll see that people born on foreign soil here commit fewer crimes per person than people born on American soil.
Yeah, crime. That is a real problem, especially right now. So what can we do about crime in the police, and what's causing a lot of the protesting? Do you have any ideas about that?
Well, there's kind of 2 parts to your question. First of all, what to do about crime? Crime is a local issue. It should be decided among, the police department, the mayor, the city council, voters. Let each locality decide how they want to handle their policing. That's not something that should be a federal issue. And it just was very frustrating to me to watch Joe Biden on the town hall talk about, oh, we need to hire social workers and psychologists and have increased training. Since when does the president decide on police training? I'm going to leave that up to the local cities and states to decide how they want to do that. But as far as the protesting, I would suggest that there has been systemic racism. If you look at the drug laws, they're absolutely weighted against people of color, and we need to fix that. We need to get rid of no-knock raids. We need to get rid of qualified immunity and end the racist war on drugs. However, I think the federal government made things worse by handing out free tanks and tear gas to the police departments. So now the police are acting more like us versus them soldiers, as opposed to protect and serve the community police officers, which is one reason why the federal government just needs to stay out of local policing.
All right. Well, I have one more big question for you. And so I want you to tell the voters that are listening, why should we vote for you?
Because I am the only politician who is saying that you know better than any special interest or bureaucrat in Washington how to spend your money and how to make decisions. And let me give you a longer definition of being a libertarian. So if you look at what we have right now with Democrats and Republicans, it's basically size fits all. We elect somebody into office for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever, and then we all live under whatever that guy says or that woman. And the libertarian way instead is that you get to make your own decisions and vote with your feet every day. So for instance, if you look at education, let's say that you want to have your kids in a school with prayer or with masks or online or vaccines or whatever. And let's say your neighbor doesn't. Right now, under the old system, you guys have to battle it out. You got to each pick your own candidate, get all your friends to vote, put out yard signs, donate money to your candidate. And then on election day, one of you is going to win and one of you is going to lose. And then you're both going to live under one system and one of you is not going to be happy. And I think this is one reason why we have such polarization in our country, why we're at battle with each other. Under the libertarian system, you would keep your resources and you could send your kid to a school with prayer or vaccines, whatever, and your neighbor could choose to send his kid to another school. So you could actually get along. I mean, imagine if we put it up for a vote Should we all be vegetarians or should we all eat steak? You can see how we would be at odds with each other. And that might sound ridiculous, but you think about how personal of a decision it is whether or not you're vaccinated, or what kind of health care you have, or what kind of retirement program you have. Why should we all vote for the same retirement program? It's ridiculous.
All right. Well, Dr. Jorgensen, thank you so much for talking to us. How can people find you and how can people support you?
They can go to joe20.com. That's JO20.com. And I'd like to point out that about 75% of our volunteers are from outside the party. So it's just showing that a lot of people are upset and they know the old system is broken. So I would welcome all of your listeners to come check us out.
All right. Well, thank you so very much for your time, and good luck to you, and good luck to our country.
Yes, absolutely. And have a great evening.
Thank you.